Hello, PodV students. Today we are going to be talking about the roles of government in the economy. We're looking at Chapter 11. This is going to be a summary of Chapter 11. It covers Learning Target 3.2 in this unit that we've been studying on market structures and failures. So today we're going to talk a little bit more about the role of government in the economy and how do they get involved in solving for market failures. So a lot of what we're going to talk about today should be a little bit of a review from your Pod A class or American Government. And it also came up a little bit in Chapter 7 when we talked about public goods. You watched a crash course recently on market failures. Some of that stuff's going to come up again today as sort of a review and to look at what is the government's part in all of that. So clearly, government plays a big role in our daily lives and our economic lives, but oftentimes there's a debate over is the role too big? So a lot of Americans would say that it is too big of a role. Economists sometimes agree and disagree. It depends on when the government is intervening and who it's benefiting. Often has a big part in their opinions on that matter. But without a doubt, capitalism is alive and well in the U.S., but the argument or the question that's posed is that because of the government involvement or in spite of that? So we're going to look at a lot of different ways that the government gets involved based on roles that are given to the government in the Constitution and otherwise. So we will continue momentarily. So the power that the federal government has to regulate the economy comes from the Constitution. Article 1 of the Constitution is what gives those government roles or powers to Congress. If you remember in Pod A, we talked about expressed powers that are in Article 1. Section 8 of the Constitution, the power that Congress has to collect taxes, to provide for the general welfare, to borrow and coin money, to establish bankruptcy laws, weights and measures, protecting writing and discoveries of authors or inventors, so patents and copyrights. Those are all things that are laid out in the Constitution, and that's ultimately giving the government power in economic matters. So one way that the government does that, or that the Constitution lays a foundation for, is protecting property rights. So the Constitution lays out this foundation for a legal system that's going to protect property rights. Oftentimes when we think of property, we think of land, right? Your home, your personal possession, some other kind of physical asset. But actually, property can refer to intellectual property as well. So inventions, forms of expression, writings, music, artwork. And no matter what form the property takes, property rights are going to give that owner the ability to determine how it's used. Are they going to sell it? Are they going to lend it out? How do they protect it? How do they insure it? They own it, they can trade it. So that's giving a lot of ownership to the person, and it's a lot of economic involvement or an incentive that promotes economic progress. So if you remember in the beginning of this class, we talked a lot about incentives, what motivates people to do things. And economists argue that property rights are essential in a free enterprise system. In order for it to be successful, you need to protect those rights because incentives matter. Ownership of property creates a number of incentives that promote economic progress. And there's 3 of them listed here on the slide. So number 1, private ownership encourages people to take care of their property. If you own a house, you have a strong incentive to keep it nice and presentable and fix the roof if it leaks, or if you have a broken window, you replace it. The value of your home is going to decrease if you don't take care of it. The second thing is private ownership encourages people to make the most productive use of their property. So it's in the best interest of an owner to use the property in a way that's based on their needs. A farm has an incentive to plant crops to make the best use of the local soil and the climate. And then the third incentive is private ownership encourages people to develop property in ways that benefit others. Under the law, you can do whatever you want with your property for the most part, but you also have the potential to gain by making what you own useful for someone else. So that can increase your property's value. If you are able to own property that provides a service that could attract other people, that helps you, but it also benefits others. So it's something that is really important in this free enterprise system. One thing when it comes to property rights is something called eminent domain. So this is the one exception to property rights. If you remember again from Pod A, eminent domain is covered in the Fifth Amendment, and the eminent domain is the power of the government to take private property for a public use. So it's included in that Fifth Amendment. Most of the Fifth Amendment, if you remember, was about due process. But this is sort of that clause that was hidden in the end of the Fifth Amendment that basically says that if you have private property, it's protected unless the government needs to use it for some public purpose. So they're going to build something that has a benefit to the rest of the public. They can take that property. So, moving on, federal government is involved in many aspects of the economy by setting and enforcing standards for dozens of industries. So, there's a regulatory role that government plays in the economy, and this is something that you've probably encountered in your daily life, but maybe never realized that it was government playing a part in the economy. So, the things that we're going to be talking about next are really looking at regulatory rules. What are some agencies or ways that government gets involved? And one of the ways that it does that is to look at competition. So by the government getting involved in regulation of the economy, they're trying to protect the interest of all participants. And competition is vital to our economic system. So the government wants to get involved to help maintain competition when the market is failing to do so. So, like property rights, competition is essential if a market is going to work the way it's supposed to work. Competition forces producers to use their resources efficiently, to develop better products or new products, innovative things. It also helps keep those goods and services affordable. So, competition really helps us out. The government does not like when businesses stop being competitive. So, if you remember when we looked at market structures and we talked about a monopoly and we talked about antitrust laws, the Justice Department of the United States and the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, are regulatory agencies. So that's a part of government that makes and enforces different standards for an industry. So those two work together to basically act as modern day trust busters. So they want to break up any of those businesses that have the ability to become a monopoly. If there is a combination of businesses or one particular industry that is dominating that market, they want to break that up. If an industry is getting to the point where they're eliminating their competition and there's a threat of a monopoly, the government is going to get involved. So mergers is something that the government is going to look closely at. The Justice Department and the FTC are going to monitor a merger. A merger is when two separately owned firms or industries combine into one. A merger becomes illegal if it's going to lessen competition or potentially create a monopoly. So the graphic on the right side of the screen is from your textbook, and it was talking about in 2018, AT&T and Time Warner were two telecommunications companies and a cable company that merged together. And there was a lot of concern over the merger and whether that was going to give the company too much power over consumers and eliminate some of that competition. So mergers are something that have to be investigated by the FTC. They can't just happen without the government getting involved. There's a process that has to be completed. So another type of regulatory agency is the government takes on the role of protecting consumers, savers, and investors. So the government wants to make sure that products are safe and dependable. So there are regulatory agencies specifically for protecting consumers, like the FDA. You've probably heard of the Food and Drug Administration. They're going to oversee food safety. They test and approve drugs before they go on the market. That is there to ensure consumer safety and safe practices. There are agencies in place that work to protect savers and investors. So those of you that have bank accounts or maybe you work in a bank, you've probably heard of the FDIC, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. The FDIC ensures that all bank deposits are there. So that up to $100,000 per depositor, they want to make sure that that bank deposit's going to be there. So if you go to get your money out of the bank, it's guaranteed that that money will be there for you. The Securities and Exchange Commission, or the SEC, is an agency that protects investors by making sure that they have the information that they need to judge whether you should buy, sell, or hold a particular security or stock. So again, that's a corporation, a government regulatory agency that allows Americans to feel confident when they are transacting with businesses and individuals in an industry. Protecting workers is another role that the government takes on. So those of you who have jobs, a lot of the safeguards that are put in place in the interest of workers come from the Department of Labor. One of their primary goals is to protect workers' economic rights. So making sure that you get your wages, making sure that the workplace is free of discrimination, making sure that there's unemployment insurance available if you're unexpectedly laid off from your job. They want to make sure that the practices at your work are safe. Some of you in your jobs may have had OSHA training. If you've ever heard of OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, they set health and safety standards for industries. I know we as teachers have to go through a training, an OSHA training every single year to make sure that we understand safe practices in the workplace. My guess is you've probably had to do something similar. That is government getting involved in the economy, essentially. So the drawback to regulation for protecting workers, the regulatory agencies your book compares them to referees, which I think is a good analogy. The role is to make sure that firms play by the rules and that individuals are protected. But referees sometimes make the wrong call, right? They make a mistake. The public disagrees with the referee. There's booing and jeering and yelling at the referee because they made a bad call. Well, we as consumers and individuals do that with the government as well. So sometimes those government regulators get it wrong. So there's costs and benefits that have to be balanced. There's something called regulatory capture, which is essentially this revolving door between government and industry. A lot of times the people that work in these regulatory agencies also work or have worked in the industry, or they go back and forth between those two roles. So sometimes their interests are really in the best interest of the industry rather than in the best interest of the public. So that can create problems. So now we've spent some time talking about the government's role and different regulatory agencies and the way that the Constitution allows the government to get involved in the economic system. We're going to stop at this point. We still need to talk about the rest of Chapter 11, which is going to get into externalities, positive and negative externalities, public and private goods. So we'll pick up the rest of Chapter 11 in part 2 of this screencast. Thanks for listening.